Good afternoon. My name is Brian.
And my name is Shamil.
Our persuasive argument encompasses a controversial topic that I believe many of you are aware of: stop and frisk. For those who don't know, the stop, question, and frisk program in New York City is a practice in the New York City Police Department by which police officers stop and question hundreds of thousands of pedestrians annually and frisk them for weapons and other contraband. There have been several debates about whether stop and frisk is actually beneficial to the citizens of New York City. I will be speaking about why the stop and frisk program should be discontinued.
And I will be arguing in favor of the continuation of the stop and frisk program. Okay, so there are three reasons why stop and frisk should continue to be implemented in New York City. There are 1, it lowered the violent crime rate; 2, it deters people from carrying weapons; and 3, the police only have a limited number of resources. So firstly, stop and frisk takes weapons and drugs off the streets, which lowers the violent crime rate. Since stop and frisk has been implemented in 2002, violent crime rates in New York City have continuously dropped year after year. According to the New York Post, there have been 279 homicides in the city through October 31st of this year. That's down 23% from the 364 logged in the same 10-month period last year. The city is now on pace for about 100 fewer slayings this year than the 419 that are recorded last year, which was the lowest figure since 1962 when police began keeping records. Commissioner Raymond Kelly stated that the murders of New York's youngest victims, those between the ages of 13 to 21, have been cut in half since the New York Police Department launched their stop and frisk policy, a program for disarming small neighborhood gangs. We're saving the lives of children by keeping this policy in place. Another way to show the success of stop and frisk is by comparing the crime rate in New York City to the crime rate of other large cities that do not use stop and frisk. According to the New York Times, Boston's crime rate is 4,107 crimes per 100,000 residents. In New York, that number is 2,257 per 100,000 residents. In 2010, Chicago's murder rate was more than double that of New York. This means that the city with stop and frisk is having the least amount of violent crimes. In New York, few believe that a plummeting murder rate could be sustained over each and every year. But it has been. And Mayor Bloomberg points to the success as vindication of the New York Police Department's stop and frisk policy. Another purpose of the stop and frisk policy is to deter criminals from carrying around guns, because they would then risk the chance of being stopped and frisked, which would lead to their arrest. According to the New York Times, that deterrence has taken place. Street gangs now use what they call community guns in communal locations rather than on their person, to avoid a gun possession arrest if they are stopped. The city's astounding homicide drop, 82% from 1990 to 2009, is driven by this decline in gun crime. By having less guns on the street, it decreases the amount of shootings taking place, which in turn leads to a decrease in murders and violent crimes, which in turn leads to a safer city. Lastly, one major argument against the use of stop and frisk is that it disproportionately targets African Americans and Hispanics. However, we have to remember the police have a limited amount of resources. They simply do not have the manpower to put police officers in every area of the city, so it makes sense for them to place more police officers in areas that have a higher crime rate. According to the National Review, the program is not a random search administered across the entire population. Instead, it is applied most robustly in high crime areas, which tend to be disproportionately Black and Latino. Therefore, as infuriating as it is to be stopped for no reason, stop and frisk should continue to be employed throughout the city, as it is continuing to lower the amount of violent crimes taking place, and it's also taking guns off the street. It's making it safer for everyone, and it is saving lives. Thank you.
In opposition to Shamil's argument, I have 3 points as to why the stop and frisk program should be discontinued. First, police officers have turned the stop and frisk program into examples of racial profiling and haven't created immense change. Second, stop and frisk actually makes the police officer's job harder because the victims of actual crimes are less likely to report them. Lastly, the stop and frisk program violates our constitutional rights to privacy as citizens. Just to give you a little background information on this program, in 2011, about 684,000 people were stopped. The vast majority of these people were African American or Latino. Studies have shown that over 75% of citizens who have been stopped belong to one of these two demographics. According to Kenny Wiley's account from MSNBC, the stop and frisk program is stopping and frisking, but they aren't finding anything. In a recent interview, Mayor de Blasio is quoted saying, "Stop and frisk is not catching the real bad guys." Also, according to the New York Times, there has never been a proven correlation between the stop and frisk programs and the decrease in the amount of crimes. Like I said before, stop and frisk actually makes police officers' jobs harder. After instituting the stop and frisk program in New York City, there has been tremendously less communication between the public and police officers. Although Shamil mentioned that the number of reported crimes have decreased, that is not to say that crimes have not occurred. This supports the idea that the general public is less likely to trust the New York Police Department. Also, the original purpose of the stop and frisk program was to provide the public with a sense of protection. However, in a study conducted by The Atlantic, a majority of the general population now develops a sense of fear when they see patrol cars roaming around the area. The New York Police Department lives by a code of CPR, or courtesy, professionalism, and respect. However, under the stop and frisk program, New Yorkers, especially African Americans and Latinos, can no longer depend on police officers to protect them, but rather violate their personal space. Lastly, the stop and frisk program violates our constitutional rights to privacy as citizens. As citizens, we have a constitutional right to privacy. Again, Mayor de Blasio is quoted saying, "We will not break the law to enforce the law." By allowing police officers to stop whomever they want by somewhat creating what they call their probable cause, the NYPD is violating our First Amendment rights. Understandably, the stop and frisk program will discourage criminals from carrying around weapons and other contraband. However, this is not to say that guns and different kinds of drugs are not being moved continuously. As an American citizen in New York, I can say that I would not be comfortable if I was walking around and police officers had the ability to tell me to stop at any time and pat me down for things that aren't even there. Police officers are people who should enforce the law, not violate rights. Evidently, the stop and frisk program should be discontinued in New York City for 3 reasons. Police officers have turned the stop and frisk program into examples of racial profiling. It makes police officers' jobs harder. And lastly, it violates our constitutional rights to privacy. Thank you.